Ever since the vote to leave the European Union in 2016, the UK has seen 5 prime ministers, a historic change in its great monarchy. Yet, its economy has suffered from severe stagnation. In fact, a report shows that while the US, France, Germany, and other G7 countries have grown considerably, the UK has become 4% poorer, partly due to the pandemic, but mainly a post-Brexit trauma. So, what caused Brexit? In the last 4 decades, one can say Britain has never really felt at home in the European Union, despite the EU's lucrative opportunities such as free trade zones and a combined economic might. For many Britons, the EU was terribly expensive, and the cost of being a member of the European Union outweighed the benefits it provided. According to the UK Parliament, Britain made an average net contribution of around £7 to £7.5 billion per year between 2016 and 2019 to the European Union. And in 2019, the UK made the second largest net contribution to the EU, with a staggering €9.77 million. Britons claimed the dividends they received from the EU were nothing compared to what they had contributed so far. Moreover, Britons wanted sovereignty, the freedom to make trade regulations that affected the UK in the UK. Another problem with the EU was the rising uncontrolled migration among member states. Being a member of the European Union, for instance, allows working-class Britons, Frenchmen, Italians, or Germans to take up employment in another member state on the same conditions as the nationals of that particular state. Honestly, this is a fantastic opportunity. However, with the lack of skilled professionals and the reduction in the productivity of British workers, several Britons weren't happy with the freedom afforded immigrants from other EU nations. Also, you'd recall the Arab Spring of 2010 and the massive waves of immigration it created. Well, several Brexiteers criticised the UK government and the European Commission for failing to tackle this problem, and the fact that the former German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, opened Germany's borders to immigrants worsened the EU's immigration problems. To fan the flames, most Britons believed the European Commission, the independent executive arm of the European Union, was run by unelected bureaucrats. The fact that there is no direct election for the position of the Commission President has seen its legitimacy called into question. The Commission has been called out for its lack of transparency, conflicts of interest, and excessive spending, to say the least. Moreover, several economists are of the opinion that Brexit was a political move by the British government. Former Britain Prime Ministers James Cameron and Boris Johnson have become names synonymous with the Leave campaign. Matter of fact, when the United Kingdom left the EU in January 2020, Boris Johnson promised that Britain would rediscover the muscles that hadn't been used for decades. This promise was 3 years ago, and since then, the UK's economy hasn't grown an inch of muscle. To be fair, there are several other agents responsible for the slow growth of the UK economy, for instance, the global pandemic. But while other G7 countries have recovered, Britain is still struggling, and important areas like trade, the service sector, and British politics have seen the worst of it. With the UK no longer reaping the benefits of the EU international trade agreements, prices for the range of goods it once traded have increased dramatically. One of the hardest hit industries has been the automotive industry, one of the UK's biggest and most productive industries. Before Brexit, the automotive industry was one of the star performers of the British economy. By 2017, output had increased by over 60% over the last 7 years, and data from the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders shows that there had been over £8 billion worth of investment in the industry in the last 5. Fast forward to 2022, British factories built only 775,014 cars for the entire year, the lowest annual figure since 1956. Production had fallen 9.8% from 2021 and a depressing 41% from 2019. The tariffs imposed on exports to the EU from non-EU nations have made the British automotive industry less competitive. Car manufacturers have decided to set up shop elsewhere, and the industry has suffered for it. The UK's financial sector has also suffered a drastic blow by Brexit. For instance, the loss of passporting rights, which allowed UK financial firms to operate in the EU without having to establish a local presence, has disrupted the flow of financial services between Britain and the EU. In addition, regulatory barriers between the UK and the EU have dramatically increased. meaning that financial firms have to either set up new operations in the EU or comply with new EU regulations that differ from those in the UK. Either way, it's costlier for financial firms to operate on both fronts. This has led to reduced investment in the UK financial sector, as several firms have chosen to relocate their operations to the EU, which has greater market potential. Also, official statistics from the Office of National Statistics (ONS) show that the number of people employed in financial services has somewhat stagnated. Estimates have shown that had the rate of job creation followed its pre-Brexit trend, there would have been 85,000 to 105,000 more workers in financial services. Another sector affected by Brexit is the UK's tourism industry. For EU citizens especially, spending a holiday in the UK has become a bit more complicated. Before Brexit, anyone who owned an EU national ID could freely enter Britain. But since October 1st, 2021, only people in possession of an EU passport, which is owned only by an estimated 2 out of 3 EU citizens, can visit the UK. Visit Britain published a report in 2022 showing the total visits to the UK dropped by about 1/3 of 2019's figures. But due to the disruption of travel caused by the global pandemic in 2020, it's unclear whether these figures are impacted more by those disruptions or by the effects of Brexit. Also, European-based tourists have complained about the rising costs in Britain's hospitality sector. These problems are then made worse by staff shortages in the hospitality sector. Data collated by Oxford University's Migration Observatory show the number of EU employees in the British hospitality sector dropped by 25% between June 2019 and June 2021. Well, on the bright side, Visit Britain's records show that of the 8 million people to visit the UK in April, May and June of 2022, almost 5 million of them were EU nationals. These figures are not too different from the ones recorded in the same months of 2019, which perhaps show that in the long run, tourists may come to accept the post-Brexit travel rules. Another post-Brexit problem is the UK's sluggish GDP growth. Although it wouldn't be fair to assume the effects of Brexit as the sole cause, it has also not helped the situation. The service sector accounts for 81.2% of the UK's GDP, and the majority of this figure comes from the financial services sector in London. GDP growth is hampered by the lack of new workers in this sector, which is a major concern as a country's GDP is calculated on the individual wealth of its citizens. Another hindrance to GDP growth has been the reduced level of investment. An ONS study showed that investment had flatlined between 2016 and 2019, after a 6% yearly growth between 2011 and 2016. This slowdown in GDP has naturally led to an increase in unemployment. When firms are faced with low economic growth and investments, they reduce their workforce in order to maximize profit, which inadvertently leads to unemployment and subsequently poverty. It wouldn't be wrong to say multiple global events have contributed to making Brexit appear to have had an even worse effect. Inflation is one of them. According to a recent study, a third of UK food price inflation since 2019 has been caused by Brexit. Not just the UK, but Europe as well has been massively affected by a flood of challenges: the global pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. As we know, the reduced distribution of natural gases from Russia has driven prices sky high all over Europe. The UK has had a much tougher time wrestling with this problem of inflation than other G7 countries. The post-Brexit bureaucracy, now plaguing the import of goods and services into the UK, have made it even harder for businesses to operate and, therefore, more expensive for consumers to get a hold of these necessities. Research done by the London School of Economics compared the prices of some of these commodities with those from other nations, and reported that if all factors were mainly down to Brexit, then the new laws may have added an extra £250 to the typical household's grocery bills between December 2019 and March 2023. Now, the impact of Brexit on British politics cannot be understated. The process leading up to the referendum and its aftermath have caused a great divide in the political landscape between those who voted to leave and those who voted to remain. Leavers and Remainers became new political and social identities that still shape how Britons view politics and themselves. Britain is now a less attractive country to do business with, as the country has zealously isolated itself from the rest of Europe. Europe. For one, the UK is no longer part of the EU's single market or customs unions, which makes it more difficult to freely conduct trade between other EU countries. This has hampered their bid to negotiate new trade deals and form beneficial alliances with other countries. As we speak, the UK's influence over international affairs has become a little tricky. The UK continues to negotiate its future relationship with the EU, and until those conclusions are reached, the uncertainty will remain. Since leaving the EU, the UK has signed 3 new trade agreements with Australia, New Zealand, and an agreement to join the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership (CPTPP). However, these deals cannot cater for all that has been lost as a result of Brexit. Also, the UK has successfully signed 2 digital trade agreements with Singapore and Ukraine, but they remain in negotiation with the US, India, Canada, Mexico, Israel, Switzerland, and the Gulf Cooperation Council (CGC), with little signs of a breakthrough. The nature of these pending negotiations and political uncertainty have made it difficult for the British government to make progress on other important issues, such as the worsening healthcare crisis. The UK has had to cut funding to the National Health Service (NHS) in recent years, which has led to a steady decline in the quality of healthcare being received by its citizens. This is one issue, among many others, that experts say needs desperate attention from the British government. In their search for answers, many Britons have resorted to blaming the people they believe are responsible for their plight: immigrants. These folks have increasingly fallen victim to xenophobic and racist treatment. In the last 5 years, instances of hate crimes in England and Wales have more than doubled, especially since the Brexit referendum. The social atmosphere is somewhat divided. Many who voted to remain have been given no reason to change their stance, while those who voted to leave are beginning to change their minds as the hardship worsens. 5 prime ministers have passed through the doors of number 10 Downing Street since 2016, each less trusted than the last, a testament to the depths the British government has sunk. All said and done, the benefits of Brexit could put the UK in very good standing for years to come. Now their sovereignty has been regained, and Britain is free to make its own laws and regulations without external interference. Britain can control its own borders and immigration policy, which in the past was of significant concern to its citizens. The UK will no longer have to contribute to the EU budget, which could mean they have more money to spend on improving public services and other economic issues. They will also be able to develop policies and regulations that suit their specific needs and priorities, and more importantly, Brexit will help to increase political accountability, as all decisions will be made by UK officials with no input from the EU. But there is no denying that it will have a significant impact on Britain's economy and the world in years to come. For now, work remains to be done by the British government to prove they have indeed played their cards right.